Very warm welcome to Moneycontrol. I'm Shweta Punj. India posted its first quarter GDP numbers yesterday, with growth coming in at a robust 7.8%. In a world that's straddling between 1 and 3% growth, the number looks stupendous. But there is always a but. It is too early to celebrate yet. A deep dive shows that India's manufacturing story is still underwhelming. Also, nominal growth for the quarter is at a 9-quarter low. The budget had assumed a nominal GDP growth of 10.5% while making the budget estimates for 23-24. Nominal GDP is down to 8%. Rural demand is also tepid, and there are global headwinds at play. To understand these numbers better and what they mean for the year going forward, I'm joined by Mr. D.K. Joshi, Chief Economist at CRISIL, Ms. Aditi Nair, Chief Economist at ICRA, and Dr. Devendra Kumar Pant, Chief Economist and Head of Public Finance at India Ratings. Thank you very much, Dr. Pant, Aditi, and Mr. Joshi for joining us. I want to begin, three of you had given different estimates for the year. Let me begin with Mr. Joshi first. Mr. Joshi, how far off were you, or how close were you to the numbers that came out yesterday in your estimates?
Well, we were at 8.2%, and we were about 40 basis point off the number that came. And by the way, I think one should also remember that these are the first estimates. I think once you have more information, these anyway get revised either up or down. So I think I won't fret about 40 basis point difference at this juncture.
Right. Aditi, also an optimist. What's your reading of the numbers that we got yesterday?
Shweta, we were at 8.1% for GVA and 8.5% for GDP. So the numbers have come in a little bit lower than what we were expecting. So overall, I would say good numbers, but slightly disappointing. And mainly where we've seen that the numbers have not come in line with our expectations was the manufacturing sector. We thought that the fall in commodity prices and the improvement in margins would lead to a much higher GVA growth for the manufacturing sector than what has come through in the first estimates that the NSO has put out yesterday. So as Dr. Joshi said, perhaps there is a scope for upward revision going ahead. But yeah, this for us was the main disappointment.
Sure. Dr. Pant, yours was the closest estimate, and one would think that that was probably a very cautious view, because these are the first estimates and they're bound to be revised upwards. Your first take on the numbers?
As I said, numbers were closer to our expectations, but the way things are, it could be a quarter from now. The Joshi and Aditi may be correct, I may be wrong, because this is the situation what is happening. These numbers are so volatile. There's so much noise in the data. And in fact, the quarterly data from the expenditure side always has been the most noisiest data, Indian economic data. Yeah, probably one of the reasons why we were closer to the number which was put out yesterday, that we were not expecting very high manufacturing sector growth, despite our coming of the weak base, and we were still around 4.5% kind of number. So probably that was the major reason why our number was closer.
Right. I do want to talk about the manufacturing story, because there seems to be some confusion about it, and it has left a lot of economists very perplexed, because I was talking to a few economists yesterday also, and everyone was predicting even double-digit growth. Not, ICRA had 7% growth projected, but a lot of economists were also projecting double-digit manufacturing growth. So clearly there's a disconnect there. What really is going on? Because when you look at the EBITDA margins of manufacturing-led companies, they seem to be doing very well. So what do you think happened there, Mr. Joshi?
Well, I think it's hard to say. I think CSO will be able to better tell you what has exactly happened. But I think my broad take would be that it's not that manufacturing did not have headwinds. I think there were headwinds from the export side. Exports did not do well in the first quarter. And as a result, the sectors in the manufacturing that service those exports would also have got hit. Now, I think the issue was that the way it works is that the company profit margins were looking very good. input costs had declined. So as a result, the value-added component of the output that manufacturing produces, and which is the GDP, I think should have benefited from that. And I think it did not happen to the extent which people expected. And I think since deflator was low, so you divide the nominal numbers by the deflator and then get the real. And since deflator was low, it would have accentuated the growth in manufacturing more. So I think that doesn't seem to have happened. I mean, so let's wait, I think, for the next revision on that. When
Sure.
more data becomes
So,
available from the corporate
sure,
side.
Sure. Dr. Pant, your assessment, why is it that some economists were projecting a double-digit growth in this sector, and what we see from the CSO is a fairly conservative number, 4.3?
Look, Sweta, what we look at when we look at the EBITDA, we are looking at all listed company universe. Whereas when we are looking at the manufacturing GVA, yes, EBITDA plus wages will be nothing but the nominal GVA. But when we are looking at manufacturing sector, it includes all unorganized sector also. Now, if this number, if the number is correct, which CSO has put out, and the company balance sheet numbers are also correct, then this tells us simply one thing: the unorganized sector or unregistered sector is in great distress. And that's why the double-digit EBITDA plus a respectable wage growth for registered corporate sector is leading. Despite strong performance, the unregistered sector is pulling down economic growth. And if you look at that and try to stack it against how the households are driver of savings, drivers of investment, drivers of GVA, this is a very, very, very difficult situation, or not a very good situation for economy to be in.
Very important point there, Dr. Pant. Aditi, I want you to weigh in here. When it comes to the red flags, Dr. Pant pointed out that looking at the manufacturing numbers, it does point to stress in the unorganized sector. When you look at consumption also, it's largely being driven by urban demand. What according to you are the red flags that are coming out of these numbers that we need to be mindful of?
So I'm going to differ slightly from what Dr. Pant has just said. My understanding is that the first round of data that we have from the NSO for any quarter, for the manufacturing sector, they don't have much real data on the unorganized sector. And I think they end up using the IIP as a proxy for the unorganized sector in the first round. And as more data comes in over the course of the year, then they actually update it to using the real data that they subsequently have access to. So perhaps what is happening is that for the organized sector, we have the real EBITDA data and the wage data, which we are, using. But for the unorganized sector, we're using the IIP as a proxy, which is volume data. And volume data improved a little bit sequentially, but it was definitely much lower than the kind of EBITDA growth that has benefited from the easier commodity prices, which have pushed up the margins. So maybe that's where the divergence is coming in, that where the proxy that is being used for the unorganized sector, it's correct for volumes, but it may not be correct for earnings at this point in time. So let's see. I do think that there is a higher likelihood that subsequent data will lead to an upward revision in the manufacturing GVA growth.
Okay, I want to get a sense on the nominal growth numbers. Nominal growth for the quarter is at a 9-quarter low. Is that a matter of concern? Dr. Pant.
That's a matter of concern, because when we look at whatever the taxes collected by the government, that is collected on the nominal value or the current price, while the real is after adjusting the inflation. And your GDP deflator respond mainly to the how the WPI trend has been. And WPI, if we see, the first quarter has been deep negative, and that is being reflected on the because of that you have the lower nominal GVA or GDP growth. and that is translating. If you look at how the tax collections have been, the tax collection growth in the first quarter has not been very strong. If you leave aside the GST, the number which came in yesterday shows your corporate tax collection is negative. Your personal income tax in first 4 months growth has been somewhere around 6% odd. It's only the customs and your GST which is growing at a respectable pace. So that has a lower nominal GDP growth has an implication for the union and state government finances, because that will lead to a lower tax revenue growth, and which will have implications for deficit and in turn the borrowing by the state and central government.
Mr. Joshi, I'd like you to come in here also on the nominal growth numbers. How much of a worry is that for you, and how do you think will it play out for the year going forward?
Well, I think my sense is that this would be the lowest nominal growth this year, although in real terms this will be the highest GDP growth. Reason is, I think if you look at the next quarter, which is your June to September, CPI inflation is quite high, and WPI inflation is not that low as I think as it was in the first quarter. So your deflator will expand a little bit. So I think what will happen is that I would still believe that for the year we could still end up between 9 to 10% nominal GDP growth, and 8% is kind of an aberration, I think, which has happened in this quarter, because inflationary pressures are, I think, particularly from food, etc., are there. Now, what I agree with Dr. Pant that I think it is it's a base for collection of taxes. So if the base shrinks, I think it has implications for tax collection. Other than that, I think most of the ratios, I think like fiscal deficit, debt, I think everything is with respect to GDP, nominal GDP. So if nominal GDP becomes smaller, I think those ratios will look a little unfavorable, so to say. Apart from that, I think the phase of high nominal GDP growth is clearly over. What we saw in the last two fiscals, I think nominal GDP growth at 15-16%. I don't think that doesn't seem to be a scenario that we are looking at for the next couple of years. I think unless I think there is another commodity cycle and WPI goes up to double digits, etc., which is not a base case for us. So I would say that I think we will now be in a phase of more moderate nominal GDP growth over the medium run, maybe 10-11%. And what that also means is that to correct your deficits, you will have to work even harder. I mean, because your base, which is going to be increasing at a smaller pace.
Okay, Aditi, do you agree with Dr. Joshi here or Dr. Pant on the nominal growth numbers? Now, Dr. Joshi has said that this is probably the lowest nominal growth that we'll see for this year. Dr. Pant has flagged some concerns. What's your reading into this?
We did start the year assuming that nominal GDP growth will be around 9 to 10%. So I'm broadly in agreement with that number. And the WPI should be coming out of deflation in another couple of prints. So definitely after that, the deflators are not going to look the way that they have in Q1. And certainly this quarter, the one that we're in right now, CPI inflation is going to peak and then hopefully moderate after that. So I think we're going to have a combination of the WPI and CPI. Leading to higher average inflation, and therefore, that's going to have an implication for the deflator and for nominal GDP growth going ahead. I think bigger issue, yes, of course, nominal GDP growth is important because that's the denominator for all the fiscal metrics. But real GDP growth is equally important. And here, I think we're all in agreement that Q1 is going to be the peak for this year, and we are going to see more moderate trends going ahead.
So going forward, we're going to see more moderation in the growth numbers, GDP growth numbers. Does this put any pressure on the budget calculations? Because the government was working with a higher nominal GDP growth number. Do you think that this could force the government to revise their estimates. This is also an election year. They'll want to spend more to create a feel-good factor. Does this put those plans under pressure, Dr. Pant?
Unlikely because it's too early. 8% in the first quarter nominal GDP growth, and way the WPI is not repeating it, but just WPI will come into the positive territory. And the response to GDP deflator, WPI respond more strongly to the GDP deflator compared to the CPI. In all, the 10.5 kind of growth will be bit difficult, nominal GDP growth. But yes, there are some avenues whereby they will be able to manage it. I'll say manage it. Some of them could be the standard, which has been being done from the ages, is rolling over of some expenditure, asking for a higher dividend from the public sector enterprises, so on and so forth. But right now, what I'm more worrying is if, although the IMDs yesterday has said, or today morning has said, that September rainfall will be the normal, but if September rainfall behaves some similar to what August was, then there will be huge amount of pressure both on the government to provide, not only the union government, even the state government, to provide the drought relief, and that is going to pull down even your consumption demand is going to be hit, and that will be a real problematic situation for government to meet 5.9%. Because if nominal GDP growth is low, then even to achieve 5.9 in absolute term, you have to do better than that. Then only they will be able to achieve.
Sure, right. So, yeah, I do want to talk about India's consumption story. What's your assessment of the numbers that you saw yesterday? And considering we've had, so far a slightly erratic monsoon. August has been the driest in over 100 years. September rains are expected to be normal, but we don't know how that will play out. So, I want to get a sense on India's consumption story. How is it looking at the moment, and going forward from here, what are the pulls and pressures that we'll have to weather? Dr. Joshi.
Well, I think I'm not too disappointed with consumption, first of all. I think 6% growth over a high base is reasonably good. If I take you back to the previous estimate of GDP that came out, the second half consumption growth was only 2.5%. So actually there's clearly, and people were talking about consumption completely faltering. So that scenario has not played out. But there is a dichotomy in consumption in two ways. One, I think the consumption boost, my sense, is largely urban centric. The corporate wages we expect to grow at around 10% this year. So that contributes to consumption. The services rebound that is taking place, and that was visible in yesterday's data as well, that is an urban-centric activity. So I think most of the consumption push is coming from urban areas. In rural areas, I think the wages are flat, and on top of that, the vagaries of weather, I think, also pose a risk to them. So the delta from rural side is not that high. And the second dichotomy in consumption, which we observe, I think, anecdotally mostly, and with some data as well, is that the consumption items of luxury consumption items, high value, high ticket items, I think these are seeing very brisk demand, whereas I think the entry level stuff is the demand is a bit tepid. So I think these are the two dichotomies in consumption that are playing out right now. In the next quarter, which is the second quarter of this year, which is July to September, you will see some hit to consumption because sudden spike in inflation will eat into the discretionary spending power of the individuals, and the high inflation hits poor most. I think that is pretty well known, and that is only a second quarter phenomena. After that, I think it will start normalizing again. So that's how we look at consumption this year.
Aditi, what's your assessment? Because any hotel you try and book, everything is packed, flights are packed, like Dr. Joshi pointed out, premium cars are selling like hotcakes, but clearly that's not reflecting the India story completely.
Shweta, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and go back to the monsoon. It's honest, I mean, my view, it's been a pretty terrible monsoon so far. And even if we get to the top end of what the IMD has forecast yesterday for September, the full year monsoon is going to be characterized as below normal. So at best, we're going to, just about be at the threshold of below normal to normal rainfall now for the season as a whole. Now, if you end up with heavy rainfall in September, that's no good for standing crops. That's not very good for the harvest. Similarly, very heavy rainfall in October is not good to have the harvest on time. So now there is a sort of balancing that we need to do in terms of what's good for the Kharif crop versus what's good for reservoirs, groundwater, and the Rabi crop going forward. So, bit of a catch-22 kind of a situation that's going on. Now, rural demand is going to be cautious given all of these issues. So I don't think that we can expect it to pick up, at least not for the next few months until there is more clarity that the Rabi sowing is well underway and conditions are good for the Rabi crop. Urban demand, I think what possibly will be important is where the inflation is for crucial everyday items during the festive season. Because if there is a stress on the consumer wallet during the festive season, then perhaps that will have a disproportionate impact on sentiment. So I think that is something that will be quite critical to look at going ahead.
Okay, very quickly, we'll have to wrap up now. Mr. Pant, what's your outlook for the year going forward? Are you still cautious? Are you cautiously optimistic? Are you optimistic? Very quickly.
We are still cautious, and I think among all three we are at the lowest growth number for FY24. We are at 5 points. However, the way the economy has gone up and kind of pace it has shown in fourth quarter of last fiscal and first quarter of this fiscal, there will be a revision of that forecast. Maybe sometime in the month of September, but as of now we are at 5.9% for the entire.
So what's your estimate for FY24?
FY24 as of now it is 5.9%, but that will be some revision how the internals has played out in this quarter.
Sure. Aditi, what's your estimate for the year going forward?
We are only slightly more optimistic at 6%.
Okay, that's not very optimistic. I was hoping for a more optimistic view from you. Dr. Joshi, how about you? Is CRISIL also as cautiously optimistic, or are you bullish on the India story currently?
Well, we are bullish in the medium run, but for this year, I think we are at 6%. We started the year with 6% forecast, and I think we are holding on to that till now.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. So clearly the consensus is that the economists are bullish on the India story in the medium term, but this year is not going to be a cakewalk for India, and the government will have to make some tough decisions. Thanks so much for watching, and many thanks to all our panelists for putting these numbers into perspective for us. Thank you so much.
How do world leaders view India?
I've long believed that the relationship between the United States and India is will be one of the defining relationships of the 21st century.
The bright spot of the global economy.
The growth rate for India, which is 6.8 in 2022. Let's not forget, this is one of the bright spots in the global economy right now, such a high growth rate.
The potential of India is enormous, and you have now a reformer, a radical reformer, who has the ability to transform it.
On the verge of a big transformation.
इस अमृत काल में हमारे संकल्पों की सिद्धि हमें आजादी के 100 वर्ष तक ले जाएगी.
A magnet for investment.
I'm actually incredibly excited about the future of India. I think India has more promise than any large country in the world.
The world is bullish on India. Moneycontrol is bullish on India. Join the campaign. Tweet to us with #MC Bullish on India.